Part 1. In the marble heart of the Republic, where victory parades echo through triumphal arches and senators debate beneath ceilings painted with conquest, a quiet shadow moves beneath the brilliance. Rome believes itself eternal. Its legions sweep across the earth like a tide of iron. Its roads bind continents. Its language replaces the tongues of nations. And yet, every empire, no matter how glorious, rests upon foundations laid by unseen hands. Hands that till the soil but do not eat the harvest. Hands that build temples but cannot enter them. Hands that fight wars but never return home. These hands belong to slaves. By the 1st century before Christ, the Roman Republic had conquered most of the known world, and in doing so, had enslaved it. In villas and mines, in workshops and fields, millions toiled without name or rest. To the patricians who ruled, slaves were not people, but property. Tools with breath. They were born of war. Every campaign in Gaul, in Greece, in Carthage, filled Rome's markets with human cargo. Captured soldiers became laborers. Their wives became servants. Their children, inheritances. Rome's economy thrived upon bondage. Every victory brought new workers to replace the dead. Even small farmers, once the backbone of the Republic, found themselves ruined by estates run by slave labor, vast plantations stretching across Italy. The old citizen soldier disappeared, replaced by the overseer with a whip. This was the price of power, and the seed of Rome's undoing. Far to the northeast, beyond the mountains and misty plains of the Balkans, lay Thrace, a land of horsemen and warriors, where loyalty was given only to kin, and freedom was sacred. It was from here that Spartacus came. Little is certain of his early life. Some say he served in Rome's auxiliary forces, a Thracian warrior conscripted to fight in foreign campaigns. Others claim he deserted, captured for rebellion against his Roman masters. But all accounts agree on one thing: he was a man born to fight, and born to defy. When he was sold into slavery, he was sent not to a mine or field, but to the place where men were turned into instruments of spectacle, the Gladiator school of Capua, owned by Lentulus Batiatus. Capua was a prosperous city, its streets lined with marble colonnades, its markets filled with exotic goods from across the Mediterranean. But beyond its beauty stood high stone walls that hid a different kind of world, one where men learned to die beautifully. Inside the ludus, the air was thick with the smell of sweat, iron, and fear. Wooden swords struck shields in rhythmic unison. The crack of whips marked the tempo of survival. Every morning began before dawn. The men rose to drills designed not merely to teach them to fight, but to erase who they had been. They were to become something else, weapons that entertained. They learned to kill with grace. To bleed with dignity. To die with composure. To the Romans, this was not cruelty. It was art. A reflection of their belief that even death could be mastered. Among these men, Spartacus stood apart. His eyes did not yield. His silence was not submission. He watched, he learned, and within him, something ancient stirred, the Thracian fire that had burned in the mountains of his homeland. The Romans mistook discipline for obedience. But Spartacus was not obedient. He was waiting. The life of a gladiator was one of routine and cruelty intertwined. They trained with wooden weapons for months, sometimes years, before facing real steel. Meals were meager, designed to keep them strong but slow, to dull their edge of rebellion. The guards were merciless, their laughter cruel, their confidence absolute. Few ever dared to think of escape. But history often turns on the quiet thoughts of desperate men. In the evenings, when torches flickered low and the sound of chains settled into silence, whispers passed through the cells. Whispers of discontent. Of the world beyond the walls. Of freedom. Among those who whispered were men like Crixus, a Gaul whose strength made him both feared and respected, Enemaus, a proud warrior whose faith had not yet been broken, and Spartacus, whose calm presence seemed to gather the restless hearts around him. It was in those whispers that something dangerous was born, an idea. Freedom. A word spoken softly, but felt like thunder. They began to plan, quietly, carefully. The opportunity would come soon, the day they were to be sent to Rome for the games. A mass spectacle, a bloodletting designed to please the crowds. But for those selected, it was a sentence of death. And so the condemned chose instead to fight for their own cause. The plan was reckless. Perhaps it was madness. Armed with kitchen knives and broken tools, they would overpower the guards, seize whatever weapons they could find, and flee into the countryside. 70 men against an empire. But revolutions rarely begin with logic. They begin with desperation. When the night came, the gates of Capua's Ludus shook with fury. The slaves rose in chaos, blades flashing, torches falling, shouts echoing through corridors that had known only obedience. Blood spilled, but not for sport. For freedom. Spartacus was among the first to break through. He fought with purpose, not rage. Every strike measured, every move leading toward the gate and the world beyond. By dawn, the unthinkable had happened. A handful of slaves had escaped the most fortified gladiator school in Italy. They fled into the wilderness, the shouts of pursuit fading behind them. Somewhere beyond the hills of Campania, beneath the looming shadow of Mount Vesuvius, they stopped. Exhausted, hungry, and free, for the first time. Rome laughed. To the Senate, it was nothing. A handful of runaway slaves hiding in the countryside. A small patrol would be enough to end this farce. But the Romans did not understand what had just begun. For these 70 men, their escape was not an ending. It was a beginning. Among them was a leader whose name would soon terrify generals and inspire the enslaved. He was not a senator, nor a philosopher, nor a king. He was a man who had tasted the whip and still stood unbroken. His name was Spartacus. And the world's greatest empire had just created its greatest enemy. Part 2, beginning with Rome's reaction and the first bloodshed on Mount Vesuvius. Across the Italian countryside, dawn breaks in gold and dust. The vineyards of Campania shimmer under the weight of summer, their neat rows stretching toward the distant sea. To the merchants and senators of Rome, this land is peace, a proof of order, of civilization, of divine favor. Yet beyond the horizon, something stirs among the shadows of Mount Vesuvius. There, hidden in the folds of the volcanic slopes, 70 men gather around meager fires. Their wounds are fresh. Their hands still tremble from the taste of real steel. They have no army, no allies, no future written for them. Only hunger. Only fear. And a single, intoxicating truth: they are free. Freedom, they discover, is both blessing and burden. It demands choice. For the first time, no one tells them when to rise, when to fight, when to kneel. They could scatter into the forests and vanish. But something unspoken keeps them close. The same force that made them risk everything still binds them, the belief that freedom shared is stronger than freedom stolen. Among them, one voice begins to rise above the rest. It is not the loudest, nor the most violent. It is calm, deliberate, measured, the voice of Spartacus. He speaks not as a master, but as an equal. To the Thracian, leadership is not claimed by shouting orders, but by earning trust in silence. He reminds them of what they have done. They faced death and won. He reminds them of what they are: soldiers, not slaves. And though their chains are gone, the men who forged them still live. At the foot of the mountain, Rome begins to stir. Messengers rush to the villas of the wealthy, to the magistrates of Capua, to the Senate itself. The story spreads like wildfire: gladiators have escaped. Armed. Organized. Somewhere near Vesuvius. The Senate responds with laughter. The notion of slaves waging war is absurd to men who command legions. They dispatch a small force, a few hundred soldiers, veterans in name, but lazy and untested, drawn from the local militia. Their task is simple: surround the fugitives and bring them back in chains. Up on the mountain, Spartacus learns of the approach. Scouts, shepherds sympathetic to the slaves, or perhaps merely curious, bring news of the Roman patrol moving through the narrow valleys below. The rebels have little more than stolen swords, a handful of spears, and their instincts. Yet Spartacus does not despair. He studies the terrain. He studies the enemy. The Romans believe they are the hunters. They are not. The slopes of Vesuvius are treacherous, steep, tangled with vines, pitted with crevices carved by centuries of rain and fire. The militia sets up camp below the rebels' position, content to wait. Hunger and exhaustion, they think, will drive the fugitives down like frightened animals. But Spartacus sees something else. He sees the vines that hang like ropes from the cliffs above. He sees the narrow ravines that descend toward the Roman lines. He sees opportunity. In the silence of night, he gathers his men. With the same ropes that once bound them, they weave ladders from the mountain's own vines. One by one, they descend unseen down the volcanic face, carrying their weapons, their fury, and the knowledge that they have nothing left to lose. Before dawn, they strike. The Romans awake to chaos. Out of the mist, shadows emerge, the same men they thought cornered now falling upon them from behind. Blades flash. Torches scatter. Horses panic. The disciplined formation collapses into screams and confusion. Spartacus fights like a man possessed, not for conquest, but for survival. Every kill is vengeance. Every victory, a reminder that Rome bleeds like any other. When it ends, the field is silent. The bodies of the Roman soldiers lie scattered among their extinguished campfires. For the first time, the rebels stand victorious not as fugitives, but as an army. Word travels faster than the wind. Across Italy, slaves whisper of what happened on the mountain. Of gladiators who defied Rome and lived. Of a leader who fights not for power, but for the freedom of all. The name Spartacus becomes a quiet prayer, a word spoken in secret, behind closed doors, in the dark corners of kitchens and stables and fields. More fugitives begin to arrive. Shepherds, miners, farmers, runaway servants. Each brings something: tools, food, courage, hatred. The camp grows from dozens to hundreds, from hundreds to thousands. Men and women both. The Romans send another force. Then another. Each larger, each more confident. And each crushed in turn. The rebels learn to fight like wolves, swift, silent, striking where least expected. They know the land better than their pursuers. They fight with a desperation that discipline cannot match. But Spartacus understands what victory can do to men who have never known it. Freedom breeds hunger, not just for survival, but for purpose. He forbids the killing of prisoners. He orders that Roman goods, when seized, be shared equally. In an age where cruelty is the law of nations, he builds something that resembles justice. Still, he knows the truth. Rome will not ignore them forever. Every victory, every rumor, every whisper of rebellion adds weight to the wrath that will come. The Senate will not tolerate the humiliation. The Republic will respond, not with laughter, but with legions. And so, beneath the shadow of Vesuvius, amid the ash and wind, a new kind of army is born. Not of conquest, but of defiance. Not of soldiers, but of men and women who have already lost everything, and therefore fear nothing. They march not under banners, but under the open sky. Their weapons are mismatched, their armor stolen, their formations improvised. Yet when they move, there is unity in their purpose. A rhythm born of shared suffering and the promise of something no empire can give: dignity. For Rome, this rebellion is a stain to be washed away. For the slaves, it is the first breath of life after centuries of silence. And as the fires of their camp burn through the night, the stars above Italy witness something the world has not seen before: the beginning of a war not for land or gold, but for freedom itself. Part 3: The Rise of the Slave Army, Rome's first organized response, and the transformation of Spartacus from fugitive to commander. The smoke of victory drifts above the slopes of Vesuvius. What began as a desperate flight has turned into something unthinkable, a revolt that refuses to die. Among the ashes of Rome's arrogance, the free stand together, watching the dawn break over a land that had forgotten them. The air smells of iron and sweat. The ground, still slick from battle, gleams faintly in the first light. Some of the freedmen kneel, murmuring prayers to gods who may or may not have heard them before. Others stare in silence at the corpses of the soldiers who once hunted them. For the first time, they see that the Romans are not divine, only mortal. Flesh that can bleed. Spartacus walks among them, saying little. He studies the men, the weapons they've taken, the paths that lead away from the mountain. The victory is intoxicating, but he knows what it truly means: Rome will come again. Stronger. Smarter. Crueler. In the valleys below, the news spreads faster than fire. Farmers whisper to their slaves. Overseers tighten their patrols. Messengers gallop toward the Senate in panic. A single name, once unknown, now carries the taste of fear: Spartacus. To the Roman elite, the story is impossible. That a band of slaves could destroy disciplined troops is an insult to the Republic's pride. The Senate responds not with strategy, but with rage. They send another army, this time led by a praetor, a man of rank and experience. He marches north with banners high, his armor shining in the sun, confident that this time the embarrassment will end. But while Rome prepares, the mountain becomes a fortress. The freedmen build shelters from fallen trees and captured tents. They divide weapons, craft new ones from scavenged metal. Blacksmiths hammer by firelight. Women grind grain, tend the wounded, stitch together scraps of cloth to clothe the growing ranks. More fugitives arrive each day: shepherds from the hills, miners from the quarries, slaves who slip away under the cover of night. They come barefoot and broken, carrying nothing but hatred and hope. The camp grows into a small city. Children play beside men who once fought for their lives in the arena. The hum of life returns to those who had been living ghosts. Spartacus watches them change. He knows that numbers alone will not win this war. To survive, they must become more than a mob. They must become soldiers. Discipline, he tells them, is the armor of the free. Without it, freedom is only a dream waiting to die. Training begins anew, not under the lash, but under purpose. The ex-gladiators take charge, teaching formations, tactics, swordsmanship. They drill from dawn until exhaustion, turning fear into focus. Spartacus himself joins the exercises, fighting alongside them as an equal, earning not obedience but respect. Each day they grow stronger. Each day the mountain hums with the rhythm of hammers, the chants of men learning to fight not for spectacle, but for each other. When the Roman army finally approaches, it finds not fugitives but a force waiting in silence. The praetor's scouts report the rebels entrenched, thousands strong, but Rome underestimates them again. They advance up the mountain slopes, expecting a rout. The narrow paths twist between cliffs and gullies, their formations stretch thin. Then the hills erupt. From hidden ravines and gullies, the rebels descend. Stones and spears rain down. Traps spring from beneath the earth. The disciplined order of the legions dissolves into panic. The slaves strike like lightning, their cries echoing through the mountain air. The praetor's line shatters. Soldiers flee. Those who do not are cut down where they stand. By dusk, the banners of Rome lie trampled in the dirt. The rebels seize their weapons, their armor, their supplies. The impossible has happened again. Now, there is no denying it. This is not a riot. It is war. Rome trembles. The Senate recalls another commander, then another. Each swears that he will bring the rebels to heel, each underestimates the enemy he faces. The legions are trained for open battle, for clear orders and clean fields. But Spartacus fights like water, moving, flowing, striking where least expected, vanishing before the blow can land. He divides his forces, striking at estates, freeing slaves, cutting supply lines. The countryside erupts. Villas burn. Masters are driven out. For the first time in living memory, the slaves of Italy fight back, not as individuals, but as an army of the forgotten. Yet amid the triumph, Spartacus remains cautious. He forbids needless slaughter. He spares civilians, punishes theft. He knows that cruelty will only prove Rome right, that the enslaved are beasts unworthy of freedom. He demands restraint, even mercy, from men who have never known either. Some obey. Some do not. But his word carries weight. As the months pass, the rebellion spreads across the south. Camps grow, armies form, discipline hardens. Traitors and spies bring news, the Senate is alarmed. Consuls are debating. Rome's pride is wounded. The greatest power in the world cannot crush a man who was once chained. In the cities, fear creeps through the marble halls. Senators whisper of omens. Landowners flee their estates. The slave market's empty. For the first time, buyers hesitate. What if the next purchase turns against them? What if the next man sold remembers Spartacus? For Rome, this uprising is more than a threat. It is a mirror, showing the Republic what it truly is, an empire of chains pretending to be a beacon of civilization. But while the Senate argues, Spartacus acts. He begins to think beyond survival. If Rome cannot be defeated in Italy, perhaps freedom lies elsewhere, across the Alps, beyond the reach of their legions. Rumors spread that he plans to lead his people north, back to their homelands, back to the mountains where the Republic's shadow cannot reach. For the slaves, the idea is salvation. For Rome, it is blasphemy. The storm that began with 70 fugitives now darkens the whole horizon. Every victory draws new followers. Every rumor draws new fear. What was once a whisper in the dark has become the thunder of thousands marching in unison. Spartacus stands before them, no longer a slave, no longer a gladiator, but something greater. A symbol. A reminder that even in a world built on submission, the will to resist cannot be erased. Beneath the burning sun of Italy, surrounded by men who had nothing and yet dared to claim everything, Spartacus looks toward the north. Somewhere beyond those mountains lies a world without masters. And somewhere behind him, Rome sharpens its swords. Part 4. When the rebellion expands beyond Campania, Spartacus faces his first moral crisis, and Rome sends its consular armies to crush him. The fields of Italy no longer sleep. From Apulia to Lucania, the roads once filled with merchants and senators now echo with the sound of marching feet. The countryside, once proud and tamed, begins to remember its old wildness. Smoke rises from villas, not from hearths but from fire. Rome's richest men abandon their estates, fleeing north toward the capital. Behind them, their slaves tear down the walls that once caged them. Everywhere, one name passes from mouth to mouth, sometimes whispered with fear, sometimes with reverence. Spartacus. The Roman Senate can no longer laugh it away. Too many armies have vanished into the dust. Too many officers have fallen. The pride of the Republic is beginning to tremble. What began as a handful of fugitives has become a force of tens of thousands, men, women, children, all marching beneath a single will. In Rome, marble pillars cast long, nervous shadows. Senators argue, voices rising above the murmur of the forum. Some demand immediate retaliation. Others counsel patience, believing the rebellion will collapse under its own chaos. But none can hide the truth, the legions of the Republic have failed. 2 new consuls are chosen, men of rank, experience, and arrogance. They swear before the gods that they will end this shame. 2 legions are raised, armed and supplied, their standards glinting like mirrors in the sun. Their march south is slow and deliberate, every step an act of vengeance. But Spartacus is no longer the hunted. He has turned his band of fugitives into an army of the free. Their camps stretch across the hills, organized, fortified, disciplined. Blacksmiths forge blades from plowshares. Former gladiators teach tactics to shepherds and miners. They train not for survival, but for purpose. Spartacus rides among them daily, silent, watchful. He no longer fights for escape alone, he fights for an idea that even he struggles to name. Freedom, perhaps. Dignity. The right to exist without chains. The men around him follow not because of promises, but because of belief. The Romans advance, splitting their armies to corner him, one consul from the north, another from the south. But Spartacus knows the land better now. His scouts move like smoke through the hills. He reads the movements of legions the way a gladiator reads his opponent's stance, seeing the flaw before the strike is thrown. He turns toward the mountains, feigning retreat. The consuls pursue, confident they are driving him to his death. But when the Romans reach the narrow passes, they find themselves surrounded. Spartacus's army descends from the heights like thunder, closing the roads behind them. The legions, trapped in their own arrogance, fight desperately but without hope. By nightfall, their lines collapse. The banners fall. The valley is filled with the cries of the dying. The slaves stand victorious once again. Rome has been humiliated. 2 consuls defeated. 2 legions destroyed. The Senate trembles not for its armies, but for its illusion, the illusion that Rome is invincible. Word spreads faster than wind. From the fields of Sicily to the ports of Etruria, slaves revolt, inspired by the impossible. Bands of freedmen rise, burn, vanish into the hills. For the first time in living memory, the Republic bleeds from within. Yet victory carries its own danger. With each triumph, the army of Spartacus swells, not with disciplined soldiers, but with desperate men seeking vengeance. Some begin to see the rebellion not as a path to freedom, but as a feast of revenge. There are moments when Spartacus must become iron. He rides into villages where rebels have slaughtered civilians, where vengeance has turned to chaos. His anger is silent, but his justice is swift. He orders punishment, demands restraint. Freedom, he reminds them, cannot be built on cruelty. But even as he speaks, he feels the storm rising around him. There are others who do not share his vision, men like Crixus, fierce and unyielding, who sees the rebellion not as escape but as conquest. Crixus dreams of a world where the oppressed take Rome for themselves, where masters become slaves and the chains are reversed. Their alliance begins to strain. Around campfires, voices whisper. Some call for march north, to cross the Alps and find home. Others want to march south, to take the fight to Rome itself. The unity that once bound them begins to bend under the weight of victory. Spartacus stands on a ridge one evening, looking out over the plain below, thousands of fires flickering like stars fallen to earth. Each one represents a life stolen from slavery, each one a dream newly born. Yet among those flames, he sees something else, the shadow of what may come if they turn against each other. He speaks quietly to his captains. They must move north, he says. Beyond the Alps lies freedom, Thrace, Gaul, the mountains where no Roman law can reach. They have fought enough battles. They have nothing more to prove. But not all agree. Crixus refuses. His heart burns with the desire for Rome's blood. He breaks away, taking a large portion of the army with him, thousands of warriors who crave vengeance more than peace. The split cuts deep. Spartacus watches them march away, their banners fading into the distance. He does not try to stop them. Perhaps he knows he cannot. When Rome learns of the division, it strikes like a wolf scenting blood. A consul moves swiftly, cornering Crixus's force near Mount Garganus. The battle is brutal, hopeless. Outnumbered and surrounded, Crixus fights to the last. When the dust settles, his army is destroyed. Crixus himself falls, sword in hand, defiant to the end. The news reaches Spartacus like a wound. He says nothing for a long time. Then, in silence, he orders preparation for a funeral unlike any Rome has ever seen. In the fields near the Apennines, tens of thousands of freedmen gather. They build great pyres for the dead. Spartacus walks before them, his face carved with sorrow. He orders that 300 captured Romans be forced to fight to the death, not for sport, but as sacrifice, a grim echo of what the gladiators once endured. When the last Roman falls, Spartacus turns away. The message is clear. The slaves will not forgive, and Rome will not forget. As night descends, the fires burn high into the dark, their light flickering on the faces of men who have seen too much. For a moment, silence covers the camp, the silence of grief, of anger, of destiny. Spartacus knows what comes next. Rome will gather all its strength. The games are over. The true war is about to begin. Part 5. When Spartacus turns north toward the Alps, dreams of escape meet harsh reality, and the rebellion begins to fracture under the weight of its own hope. Winter drapes the Italian plains in silence. The fields that once fed the Republic now lie charred and barren. Columns of smoke rise from what were once estates, temples, and towns. Rome watches from afar, wounded, humiliated, but not yet broken. In the frozen breath of morning, Spartacus's army stirs. Tens of thousands of men and women gather their meager possessions. Spears made from plow blades. Shields patched with leather. Dreams as fragile as frost. Their leader rides among them, face hardened by loss, eyes fixed upon the mountains in the distance, white peaks shimmering like the edge of salvation. The Alps. Beyond them lies freedom. Home. The lands they were stolen from. The promise of a world untouched by Roman chains. For months, Spartacus has spoken of this march, northward, through the passes, to vanish into the wilderness beyond the Republic's reach. It is a plan built not on glory, but on survival. The army moves slowly, a living river of the dispossessed. They carry children, the wounded, the old. The cold bites through ragged cloth, through scars that no time can heal. Yet through hunger and exhaustion, hope keeps them moving. The songs they sing are not Roman, strange words in Thracian, Gallic, Greek, songs of lands they may never see again. Scouts ride ahead, scanning for legions. Rome is quiet for now, licking its wounds, reorganizing its power. But silence can be deceptive. Behind the Senate's marble calm, a decision has been made. This rebellion will not be crushed by pride or politics. It will be annihilated by discipline. The name that begins to whisper through the corridors of power is one that will soon become legend, Marcus Licinius Crassus. But Spartacus does not yet know this. He only feels the wind turning colder. Days turn into weeks as the army climbs into the foothills. The land grows harsher. Valleys narrow into jagged passes where the air thins and snow blinds the path. Horses stumble. Wagons break. Men and women who survived years of slavery now fall to the cold embrace of the mountains. Some begin to lose faith. Why flee, they whisper, when Rome's gold and grain lie behind them? Why suffer in the snow when the plains are ripe for plunder? Spartacus hears these murmurs and feels their weight. Freedom, he knows, has a price few are willing to pay. Each night, he walks the perimeter of camp, listening to the wind, to the quiet sobbing of children, to the distant cracking of ice. He knows that survival alone is not enough. If they escape into the wilderness, Rome will rebuild, forget, and enslave again. But if they stand and fight, if they wound Rome's pride beyond repair, their names might never be forgotten. It is then, in the heart of the mountains, that his resolve begins to shift. The snow falls heavier now. Supplies run low. Many can go no further. The dream of the north begins to fade like breath on cold air. Around campfires, leaders argue. Some plead to press on, others to turn back. The voices grow louder until Spartacus silences them with a look. He tells them what they do not wish to hear. That the mountains are no longer salvation. That the only path left is the one they fled. Back toward Rome. When the army descends from the high passes, it is not the same force that climbed them. The weak have perished. The strong have hardened. What returns to the plains is not an army of fugitives, but of ghosts, lean, scarred, unbreakable. Villages that once mocked them now hide in terror. Roman scouts ride far ahead of their legions, carrying warnings of a host that cannot be contained. Spartacus no longer avoids battle. He seeks it. But while he turns south, Rome prepares. Crassus has been granted command, a man not of noble blood like Pompey, nor of senatorial pride like others before him, but of money and calculation. He studies Spartacus not as a general studies an enemy, but as a banker studies risk. He builds walls across the land. Fortifications, trenches, and stakes, not to trap Spartacus in open battle, but to cut him off from food, from movement, from time. His legions drill endlessly, trained not to fear the rebels, but to erase them. The Senate gives him full authority. Rome's survival, for the first time, depends on a man whose loyalty is to no one but Rome's future, and his own ambition. Spartacus's army begins to splinter again. Among his followers are men who dream of glory, men who crave revenge, and men who simply want to live. Discipline falters. Raids grow bloodier. Villages burn not for strategy, but for hunger. At night, Spartacus sits alone, his sword across his knees. He thinks of Thrace, of a home he barely remembers. He thinks of Crixus, of all who have died believing they could break the world that built their chains. He wonders if freedom is a place, or merely an idea. When dawn comes, he stands before his army. His voice carries across the camp, calm, measured, unyielding. He tells them that Rome will come with everything it has, that they must fight not as slaves, but as equals. That death, if it comes, must come with dignity. The crowd answers not with cheers, but with silence. A silence heavier than iron. For they all understand. The dream of escape is over. Now there is only the fight. And in the distance, beyond the smoke and frost, the eagle standards of Rome begin to rise once more. Part 6, where Crassus launches his campaign, the rebellion faces its deadliest battles, and the final shadow of fate begins to fall over Spartacus. The winter wind carries with it the smell of iron. Not from the forges of Rome, but from the camps that line the southern plains, camps dug deep into the soil by men who have not known rest in years. Fires burn low, their smoke vanishing into the cold dawn, while thousands of eyes stare toward the north, where the hills shimmer under the pale light of morning. Somewhere beyond them, Crassus is building his wall. It stretches across Italy like a scar, a barrier of earth and timber, 30 miles long, guarded by legions trained to perfection. Behind it stands Rome's last defense against chaos. Before it stands Spartacus and his army, battered, hungry, but still unbroken. The time for running has ended. Spartacus watches the distant shimmer of Roman armor through the haze. His commanders stand beside him, Castus, Gannicus, and the remnants of Crixus's men. Each knows what this moment means. Between them and the sea lies Rome's vengeance, sharpened and waiting. The rebellion that began with stolen kitchen knives now faces the full fury of the Republic. Crassus is no fool. He has studied every mistake his predecessors made. He does not chase Spartacus across the hills, nor allow his legions to scatter. He builds, calculates, waits. He understands that victory is not in battle alone, but in hunger, exhaustion, despair. The wall is not just a defense, it is a slow execution. It cuts Spartacus off from supplies, from allies, from escape. Weeks pass. Food dwindles. The rebels begin to starve. The once mighty army that shook the Republic now scours the frozen countryside for anything that will keep them alive. Horses are slaughtered. Leather boiled. Even roots and bark are pulled from the earth. And yet, through it all, Spartacus endures. Each night, he walks through the camp. He speaks softly to the sick, to the frightened, to the weary. He shares their rations. He carries water himself. He bleeds beside them in the skirmishes that flare along the trenches. They call him not king, not commander, but brother. Inside his tent, Crassus studies maps by lamplight. He marks positions with stones and lines, moving them with the patience of a man arranging a sacrifice. He does not boast. He does not celebrate. He simply tightens the noose. To him, Spartacus is not a hero or a threat, he is an equation to be solved, a rebellion to be erased. And yet, even Crassus cannot deny the strange respect he feels for the man on the other side of the wall. Reports reach him of Spartacus sparing prisoners, of him refusing to call himself king, of his discipline amid chaos. A part of him wonders, what would Rome be if it were led by men like this? But he silences the thought. There is no room for admiration in victory. One night, as the moon hides behind clouds, Spartacus calls his captains together. They gather around the fire, faces hollow, eyes burning. He tells them what they already know: if they stay, they die. There is only one way left. Through the wall. It is madness. The Roman defenses are impenetrable, guarded by thousands of legionaries, trenches filled with stakes, and traps that could swallow men whole. But Spartacus knows the greater madness is to die slowly in the cold, waiting for hope that will never come. He gives the order. They will strike where the Romans least expect, in the dead of night, in the middle of a storm. The rain comes first, soft, relentless. Then thunder rolls over the plains like the growl of ancient gods. In the chaos, Spartacus's men move, silent, dark figures melting into the rain. They reach the trenches, fill them with debris, and begin their desperate charge. The battle that follows is not a clash of armies, but a storm of bodies, screams, and blood. Torches fall. The rain turns to steam where it meets fire. Roman horns blare through the night as chaos erupts along the wall. Spartacus fights at the front, his blade a blur of motion. Every strike is purpose. Every breath defiance. When dawn breaks, the impossible has happened. They have broken through. Thousands pour through the breach, scattering into the hills beyond. The Romans, stunned, regroup too late. The wall meant to end the rebellion now lies torn, a wound in Rome's pride that will never truly heal. Crassus, when he hears the news, does not rage. He does not shout. He simply nods. A predator understands when the hunt begins anew. The escape costs Spartacus dearly. Thousands die in the assault. Supplies are gone. The survivors are exhausted, hunted. But for a moment, just a moment, they are free again. Spartacus looks back toward the line of smoke rising from the destroyed wall. His chest heaves, his hands stained with mud and blood. He knows this victory is not salvation. It is merely another breath before the end. The mountains lie ahead, but Rome lies behind, and Rome never forgets. In the days that follow, word reaches the camp that new legions are returning from Spain. Pompey's forces. Veterans hardened by years of war. Crassus and Pompey, rivals for glory, will soon converge. And between them stands a man with nothing left to lose. As his army marches south, Spartacus looks at the horizon where the sun bleeds red through the clouds. He knows what it means. The gods have drawn the curtain. The final act is coming. Part 7. When the rebellion begins its final campaign, alliances crumble, Crassus closes in, and Spartacus prepares for his last stand. The rain has ended, but the earth still bleeds. Across the ravaged fields of Lucania, the survivors of the breakout march beneath a gray sky, their feet sinking into mud darkened by blood. They have escaped the wall, but not the war. The storm has passed, yet a greater one follows, silent, deliberate, inevitable. Crassus's legions rebuild behind them. Pompey's armies descend from the north. The jaws of Rome are closing. Spartacus rides at the front of his column. His cloak, once crimson, has faded to the color of dust. His sword is nicked and dulled, but still he carries it openly, not as a weapon, but as memory. The men who walk behind him are no longer an army of nations, they are a remnant, weary, scarred, bound together by something deeper than command. Freedom has become a ghost they chase through the ruins. In the towns they pass, doors slam and shutters close. The scent of burning hangs in the air where Crassus's men have already been. Scouts bring word of crucifixions lining the roads, slaves, rebels, anyone suspected of sympathy. The message is clear: Rome is not hunting for prisoners. It is cleansing the land. Still, Spartacus refuses to surrender. He sends envoys south, hoping to find ships, Cilician pirates who once promised passage to Sicily, a land rumored to be ripe for revolt. Perhaps there, across the narrow strait, the rebellion could rise anew. But promises fade faster than banners. Gold once offered is now refused. The pirates have made their peace with Rome. When the envoys return with empty hands, the truth settles like ash over the camp. There will be no escape by sea. No allies. No safe ground left beneath their feet. Night falls heavy and long. Spartacus sits beside the fire, watching embers drift upward like souls leaving the earth. Around him, silence. The laughter, the songs, the stories that once filled their camps have vanished. Only the crackling of wood and the distant call of an owl remain. He closes his eyes and remembers Capua, the sound of wooden swords striking in rhythm, the smell of sand and sweat. He remembers the first night of freedom, the rush of wind as they fled into the hills. He remembers the faces of those who followed him, Crixus, Gannicus, Enemaus, men who should have died in arenas, but chose instead to die standing. He wonders if history will remember them, or if Rome's scribes will erase their names as easily as they once erased their chains. At dawn, the rebels move again, seeking higher ground. The army has become a shadow of what it was, perhaps 30,000 remain, half-starved, many wounded. Yet when Spartacus speaks, they listen. He tells them that this will not be a flight, but a fight. That if death is the price of freedom, then they will pay it proudly. In his eyes burns not madness, but peace, the calm of a man who has accepted his place in the order of things, yet refuses to kneel before it. Scouts report Crassus advancing fast from the north. His legions march in perfect formation, shields gleaming in the sun, the thunder of their sandals shaking the ground. From the west, Pompey approaches, fresh from Spain, eager for glory. The noose tightens. On a hill overlooking the plain, Spartacus studies the horizon. He can see the dust of Roman columns rising in the distance, a brown haze against the pale sky. He turns to his captains, Castus, Gannicus, and the few who remain. He tells them that there is only one choice left, to meet Rome head-on. There will be no running, no retreat, no surrender. They will make their stand. He divides his men into ranks, veterans at the center, the strongest flanks on either side. The women and children, the wounded and the old, are sent deeper into the hills, away from the coming slaughter. Spartacus promises he will hold the Romans long enough for them to escape, though he knows none truly will. The sun dips lower, staining the sky red. In that dying light, the camp prepares for its final dawn. As night descends, Spartacus walks through the ranks. He speaks to no one, yet every head turns as he passes. Some reach out to touch him, not as a leader, but as a symbol, as if by his presence they might borrow courage. He kneels once in the dirt, driving his sword into the earth before him. His voice is quiet, carried away by the wind. He prays, not to the gods of Rome, nor to the gods of Thrace, but to whatever power still listens to the hearts of men who refuse to bow. He asks for one thing only: that his people die free. At dawn, the trumpets of Rome sound across the plain. The air trembles. The earth itself seems to hold its breath. Spartacus mounts his horse, turns to his army, and raises his sword. The sun catches its blade, blinding for an instant, like a flash of memory from another world. Today, he says, his voice clear and steady, we show them that we were men. And with that, the army of the enslaved, barefoot, starving, magnificent, begins its final march toward the legions of Rome. The ground shakes. The sky opens. And history, for a moment, forgets which side was meant to win. Part 8, where the final battle unfolds, the fall of the rebellion, Spartacus's last stand, and the terrible silence that follows. The sun rises red. Not the gentle red of morning, but the deep, bruised crimson of blood remembered. On the plains near the river Salaris, the mist clings low to the earth, and the silence is unbearable. Across the field, two worlds stand facing one another. On one side, Rome. 8 legions, banners snapping in the wind, armor polished to silver. Lines upon lines of disciplined soldiers, the ground trembling with their precision. On the other, the remnants of the rebellion. Barefoot, ragged, their weapons scavenged from a dozen forgotten battles. Men and women who have not eaten in days. Children who watch from the hills, their eyes too old for their years. Between them, only space, the breath before history exhales. Spartacus sits astride his horse, a black stallion streaked with dust. His hair, unkempt and wild, glints with early light. Around him, his commanders, Gannicus, Castus, and a few who survived the long road from Capua. They do not speak. There are no speeches left, no promises, no hope of mercy. He looks to the horizon, where the eagle standards of Rome rise against the dawn. He knows each of those banners means death. And yet, something inside him is quiet. Peaceful. He turns to his army, what remains of it. Faces carved by suffering, eyes hollowed by hunger and loss. But still, when he raises his sword, they answer with a roar that shakes the heavens. It is not a cry of victory. It is the sound of defiance, the last language of the free. Crassus, standing on the opposite hill, watches through narrowed eyes. He is draped in the crimson sash of command, his armor spotless, his expression unreadable. To him, this is not a battle, it is a cleansing. A duty to restore the world to its order. And yet, as he watches Spartacus ride along his line, sword raised high, he feels something stir in the iron cage of his heart. Pity. Or perhaps, envy. He signals the advance. The Roman horns blare, sharp as thunder. The legions begin to move, their shields locking into a living wall, spears bristling like a field of steel. The earth shudders beneath the weight of thousands. Across the field, Spartacus's army surges forward, a storm of humanity crashing against the perfect geometry of empire. They have no formation, no discipline, only rage, courage, and the memory of chains. The two forces collide with a sound that seems to split the world in half. Metal meets bone. Flesh meets fate. The air fills with screams and dust. Spartacus fights like a man possessed, cutting through the first line, the second, the third. His sword sings, his movements fluid and fierce. Every blow he strikes is not for conquest, but for memory, for those who died nameless in the mines, for those who burned in their masters' villas, for every child born into bondage. He breaks through to the Roman commander's guard, seeking Crassus himself. He cuts down centurions, disarms one, kills another. The path narrows. But the sea of soldiers is endless. An arrow finds his thigh. He stumbles but does not fall. A spear tears his side. Still, he moves. His men are dying around him, Gannicus, pierced by spears but laughing as he falls, Castus, vanishing under the weight of legionaries, nameless fighters who shout his name even as they perish. Spartacus reaches the crest of the hill where the Roman standard gleams in the light. He raises his sword one last time, his arm trembling, his breath ragged. Then the world closes in. When the dust settles, the plain is quiet. Bodies lie thick upon the earth, Romans and rebels alike, indistinguishable in death. Crassus walks among them, his steps slow. His soldiers part before him. He searches until he finds the place where Spartacus fell. They never find his body. Some say he was buried beneath the piles of his dead comrades, his face turned toward the sky. Others whisper that he still lives, that he was taken by the gods who pitied him. But Rome does not allow such myths. In its records, Spartacus dies here, a slave, a criminal, a nameless enemy of the state. And yet, legends are not written in marble. They are carved in memory. Days later, the roads from Capua to Rome are lined with crucifixes, 6,000 in all. Each holds a body of a rebel, their corpses swaying in the wind like tattered banners. This is Rome's warning. This is Rome's victory. But among the citizens who walk those roads, something shifts. Some avert their eyes. Some whisper that these men, though slaves, died more freely than any senator ever lived. The rebellion is dead. But the idea, the unbearable idea that freedom belongs even to those born without it, has survived. And so the story of Spartacus ends not with triumph, but with transformation. Rome wins the battle, but something invisible has broken in its soul. Centuries later, when new empires rise and new tyrants build their thrones upon the backs of others, the name will return, whispered in secret, spoken in defiance, sung in chains. Spartacus. The man who fought not to conquer the world, but to remind it what it means to be human. Part 9: How Rome erased, twisted, and feared his memory, and how the idea of Spartacus became immortal through history, legend, and revolution. The roads are silent now. The crucifixes stand like dark sentinels against the horizon, 6,000 reminders that Rome's mercy ends where fear begins. Crows circle above, and the wind hums softly through the wooden beams, carrying with it the last whispers of those who once dreamed of freedom. The rebellion is over. The fields that once thundered with battle lie empty. But history, like smoke, never truly disperses. It clings to the ruins, to the blood-soaked soil, to the hearts of those who remember. Rome believes it has won. But victories built upon corpses do not last. Crassus rides down the Appian Way, his triumph cold and efficient. His soldiers march beside him, their armor gleaming, their discipline unbroken. Behind them, the ghosts of a war Rome will never speak of with pride. No triumphal parade for this one. No laurels, no celebration. The Senate will not honor a victory over slaves. For all its cruelty, Rome senses something unsettling in what has just happened. The Republic has survived, but at a cost invisible to the eye, a tremor beneath the marble calm of power. In the months that follow, the bodies rot upon their crosses. Travelers avert their eyes. Merchants hurry their wagons past. But rumors spread faster than the stench. They whisper that Spartacus's body was never found. That he rose in the night and walked away. That he will come again, when the world forgets what freedom means. The Senate laughs at such tales. The poets stay silent. But in the back alleys, among the slaves who still serve wine and grind grain, the name becomes a prayer. Spartacus, not as a man, but as a promise. In the great villas of Rome, life continues. Masters feast beneath painted ceilings. They toast to order restored, to the Republic eternal. But even there, the servants exchange quiet glances. When they pour the wine, their hands do not tremble. When they kneel, their eyes do not lower. They have seen the impossible, slaves who dared to fight legions and nearly won. The fear of rebellion seeps into every marble wall. It is not loud. It does not shout. It waits. Crassus, meanwhile, returns to Rome a man of immense wealth and influence, but not of glory. His name carries victory, yes, but also unease. He is the man who defeated the slaves, but not the man who conquered the hearts of Rome. That title will belong to another, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, who arrives from Spain after the war, claiming to have crushed the last fugitives of the rebellion. In the eyes of Rome, politics devours heroes faster than battles do. Crassus receives his title, but not his triumph. Pompey receives applause he did not earn. And in their rivalry, the Republic begins to fracture anew. Julius Caesar watches it all, the tension, the ambition, the silent arrogance of men who think themselves gods. He sees in Spartacus's rebellion not merely a warning, but a reflection. He understands what Rome refuses to admit, that power built on suffering is always temporary, and that the fire of revolt, once kindled, cannot be extinguished, only delayed. In Caesar's campaigns, in the reforms that will come, echoes of Spartacus can be felt, the awareness that control requires illusion, that the poor and enslaved can never be forgotten without consequence. Spartacus had shown them all what happens when the forgotten remember themselves. The years pass. The crucifixes rot away. The Appian Way grows over with grass. The rebellion becomes a rumor, then a story, then a warning told to children, of what happens when slaves forget their place. But time has a way of reshaping stories. What was once treason becomes tragedy. What was once rebellion becomes legend. In the centuries that follow, poets will write of Spartacus as the noble barbarian, the doomed hero, the torchbearer of freedom. Emperors will suppress his name. Scholars will whisper it. And long after Rome crumbles to dust, his ghost will walk the earth again, in other lands, under other skies, wherever men and women rise against those who would chain them. For now, Rome sleeps. The Republic will fall soon, not by sword or slave, but by its own ambition, its own corruption. And somewhere, beneath the ruins of time, Spartacus's name endures, not carved in marble, but carried in breath. He was a slave. He became a symbol. And though the empire buried his body beneath the weight of silence, it could not bury the idea that rose from it. That no man, no matter how bound, is ever truly conquered while he remembers what it means to be free. Part 10, where the story moves beyond Rome, showing how Spartacus's name lived on through empires, revolutions, and centuries, becoming a myth that outlived the very world that tried to erase him. Centuries pass. The Appian Way still stretches toward the horizon, its stones worn smooth by the march of countless feet. Empires rise upon the ashes of empires. Kings crown themselves in the shadows of long-dead Caesars. And yet, in the deep places of memory, in the whispers of the poor, in the songs of the forgotten, one name endures. Spartacus. The Romans who nailed his followers to crosses believed they had silenced him forever. But you cannot crucify an idea. When Rome falls, its marble broken and its laws scattered to the winds, the world begins to forget, but only for a time. In monasteries where monks copy fading manuscripts, the story of the Thracian slave survives in fragments. His name, written in ink the color of dried blood, moves quietly from century to century. It waits. Through the dark ages, when the world grows small and the light of reason dims, Spartacus becomes a shadow of a story. A cautionary tale told by the powerful to remind their servants what rebellion brings: ruin, death, the wrath of empires. But beneath the words of warning, something else glows faintly. A spark. In the streets of medieval cities, where peasants labor beneath church bells and lordly towers, whispers begin again. Songs about a man who defied an empire. A warrior who fought for freedom, not conquest. A leader who chose death over chains. They call him by many names: the Thracian ghost, the slave king, the liberator. Each generation reshapes him, not as he was, but as they need him to be. Because the truth of Spartacus is not bound to the past. It is the mirror every age must face. In the 14th century, when peasants across Europe rise against their masters, in England, in France, in Germany, some carry banners painted with a single figure holding a broken chain. They do not know his full story. But they know what he stands for. Freedom. Dignity. The refusal to bow. The church condemns such uprisings as heresy. The nobles crush them with sword and flame. Yet each rebellion, each revolt, each breath of defiance carries the same unseen ghost beside it. The man who once stood before the mightiest army in the world and did not kneel. Time moves on. In the age of discovery, when ships cross oceans and new continents fall beneath old empires, the story travels too. In the holds of slave ships, among chained men who dream of lost homelands, the name returns. Not as history. As prophecy. In whispered prayers among the enslaved of the New World, they speak of a man who fought his masters and nearly won. They do not call him Spartacus, the name has been swallowed by centuries. But they tell his story all the same. And when revolts ignite in sugar fields and plantations, when men and women rise against the impossible weight of empire, somewhere, the spirit of that Thracian rebel breathes again. In the 18th century, the philosophers of Europe, Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, rediscover the ancient histories. They read of Spartacus and see in him not a barbarian, but a hero of reason. A symbol of man's natural right to liberty. And as revolutions bloom, in America, in France, across the Caribbean, his name is spoken again. In pamphlets. In secret meetings. In the hearts of those who believe that the age of kings must end, and that freedom must belong to all. A Roman slave has become the father of modern rebellion. In 1760, a French dramatist writes a play, Spartacus, or the Fall of Rome. In 1830, an Italian composer writes an opera. In 1846, a Russian poet calls him the first to dream of the people's victory. In 1919, a German revolutionary group names itself after him, the Spartacus League. Its leaders are killed, but their cause burns on. And when the workers of the 20th century march for equality, they too carry his face, now sculpted, painted, reborn. The face of a man who chose to die free rather than live enslaved. 2,000 years after his death, Hollywood finds him. Kirk Douglas raises a sword to the screen and shouts, "I am Spartacus." Audiences weep, not for the man himself, but for what he represents, the eternal cry of those who will not bend. The world remembers him again, not as history, but as myth made flesh. Because Spartacus was never just a man. He was a mirror for humanity's oldest truth, that power, no matter how absolute, cannot kill the longing to be free. And even now, in our time, when chains are made of debt instead of iron, when empires rule not with legions but with laws, his ghost lingers still. In every protest, in every chant, in every moment when the powerless stand and say no, the shadow of Spartacus rises beside them. He is not a figure of the past. He is the future that refuses to die. Part 10, where the story moves beyond Rome, showing how Spartacus's name lived on through empires, revolutions, and centuries, becoming a myth that outlived the very world that tried to erase him. Centuries pass. The Appian Way still stretches toward the horizon, its stones worn smooth by the march of countless feet. Empires rise upon the ashes of empires. Kings crown themselves in the shadows of long-dead Caesars. And yet, in the deep places of memory, in the whispers of the poor, in the songs of the forgotten, one name endures. Spartacus. The Romans who nailed his followers to crosses believed they had silenced him forever. But you cannot crucify an idea. When Rome falls, its marble broken and its laws scattered to the winds, the world begins to forget, but only for a time. In monasteries where monks copy fading manuscripts, the story of the Thracian slave survives in fragments. His name, written in ink the color of dried blood, moves quietly from century to century. It waits. Through the dark ages, when the world grows small and the light of reason dims, Spartacus becomes a shadow of a story. A cautionary tale told by the powerful to remind their servants what rebellion brings: ruin, death, the wrath of empires. But beneath the words of warning, something else glows faintly. A spark. In the streets of medieval cities, where peasants labor beneath church bells and lordly towers, whispers begin again. Songs about a man who defied an empire. A warrior who fought for freedom, not conquest. A leader who chose death over chains. They call him by many names: the Thracian ghost, the slave king, the liberator. Each generation reshapes him, not as he was, but as they need him to be. Because the truth of Spartacus is not bound to the past. It is the mirror every age must face. In the 14th century, when peasants across Europe rise against their masters, in England, in France, in Germany, some carry banners painted with a single figure holding a broken chain. They do not know his full story. But they know what he stands for. Freedom. Dignity. The refusal to bow. The church condemns such uprisings as heresy. The nobles crush them with sword and flame. Yet each rebellion, each revolt, each breath of defiance carries the same unseen ghost beside it. The man who once stood before the mightiest army in the world and did not kneel. Time moves on. In the age of discovery, when ships cross oceans and new continents fall beneath old empires, the story travels too. In the holds of slave ships, among chained men who dream of lost homelands, the name returns. Not as history. As prophecy. In whispered prayers among the enslaved of the New World, they speak of a man who fought his masters and nearly won. They do not call him Spartacus, the name has been swallowed by centuries. But they tell his story all the same. And when revolts ignite in sugar fields and plantations, when men and women rise against the impossible weight of empire, somewhere, the spirit of that Thracian rebel breathes again. In the 18th century, the philosophers of Europe, Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, rediscover the ancient histories. They read of Spartacus and see in him not a barbarian, but a hero of reason. A symbol of man's natural right to liberty. And as revolutions bloom, in America, in France, across the Caribbean, his name is spoken again. In pamphlets. In secret meetings. In the hearts of those who believe that the age of kings must end, and that freedom must belong to all. A Roman slave has become the father of modern rebellion. In 1760, a French dramatist writes a play, Spartacus, or the Fall of Rome. In 1830, an Italian composer writes an opera. In 1846, a Russian poet calls him the first to dream of the people's victory. In 1919, a German revolutionary group names itself after him, the Spartacus League. Its leaders are killed, but their cause burns on. And when the workers of the 20th century march for equality, they too carry his face, now sculpted, painted, reborn. The face of a man who chose to die free rather than live enslaved. 2,000 years after his death, Hollywood finds him. Kirk Douglas raises a sword to the screen and shouts, "I am Spartacus." Audiences weep, not for the man himself, but for what he represents, the eternal cry of those who will not bend. The world remembers him again, not as history, but as myth made flesh. Because Spartacus was never just a man. He was a mirror for humanity's oldest truth, that power, no matter how absolute, cannot kill the longing to be free. And even now, in our time, when chains are made of debt instead of iron, when empires rule not with legions but with laws, his ghost lingers still. In every protest, in every chant, in every moment when the powerless stand and say no, the shadow of Spartacus rises beside them. He is not a figure of the past. He is the future that refuses to die. Part 12, where the story turns inward, tracing how Spartacus's idea reshaped modern identity, art, and protest, and how his rebellion became the heartbeat of every freedom movement from the 20th century to now. The centuries blur. The marble of Rome turns to dust. Empires fade into textbooks and ruins. And yet, the story of one slave still breathes. He walks beside revolutions, marches through the streets of new cities. His name passed like a secret flame from one generation to the next. No longer flesh and blood. He has become something else entirely. An idea that refuses to die. The 20th century arrives like thunder. Trains shriek across continents. Machines devour the silence of nature. Wars engulf the world again and again. Each one fought in the name of freedom. Each one leaving behind new chains of its own. In these new empires of industry and ideology, Spartacus reawakens. He appears not in armor, but in protest signs, in poetry, in the faces of men and women who stand before tanks with nothing but belief. He stands with the miners of Wales. With the workers of Chicago. With the soldiers who refuse unjust orders. With the nameless faces in photographs who choose conscience over comfort. For them, the rebellion of Spartacus is not history. It is prophecy. In 1960, the film Spartacus releases to the world. A Hollywood epic, a spectacle of blood and glory. But beneath its polished surface beats a quiet defiance. The writer, Dalton Trumbo, blacklisted and silenced by his own government, hides behind another's name. Until one man, the actor playing Spartacus himself, refuses to accept the lie. Kirk Douglas demands Trumbo's credit be restored. And for the first time in a decade, a man condemned for his beliefs is named again before the world. The film ends with a sea of captives standing proud, each claiming to be Spartacus. It becomes more than cinema. It becomes an act of rebellion. Art imitating life. Life imitating legend. And legend remembering itself. Around the same time, another rebellion begins, not with swords, but with words. In the American South, black men and women march for dignity beneath burning suns. Their oppressors hold the power of empire, laws, guns, prisons. Yet their defiance echoes the same truth that rang across the plains of Solaris 2,000 years before. Better to stand and suffer, than kneel and survive. And though few of them speak his name, the rhythm of Spartacus beats in every footstep, every song, every raised fist. In Eastern Europe, where iron curtains divide nations, students whisper his story in basements and cafes. They see themselves in his defiance, surrounded by legions, yet unbroken. When uprisings shake the streets of Budapest and Prague, the same fire burns again. An invisible lineage stretching from Capua to Warsaw to Tiananmen Square. It is not Spartacus the man they follow. It is Spartacus the idea. that the human spirit, even crushed under empire, remembers its shape. Art begins to reclaim him. Painters in Mexico render him not as a European hero, but as a symbol of all the oppressed, brown, black, nameless. Writers in Africa and Asia invoke his struggle to mirror their own. As colonized nations rise against centuries of domination, the rebel of Rome becomes the rebel of the world. And somewhere between myth and memory, he becomes every man and woman who ever dared to whisper no. In a world that demanded yes. But as with every age, his name is used by both the just and the corrupt. Dictators quote him. Politicians invoke him. His story is claimed by ideologies that would have enslaved him all over again. And yet, through the noise, his true voice remains. Not in marble monuments or red flags, but in the quiet spaces between the lines of history. In the eyes of those who still dream of a life unchained. For some, Spartacus is revolution. For others, redemption. For a few, simply the proof that humanity's oldest instinct is not survival, but freedom. And perhaps that is why his name endures when so many kings are forgotten. Because power fades, but courage, real, selfless, imperfect courage, is the one thing empires can never erase. He was born in obscurity. He died in anonymity. And yet, across millennia, his defiance survives. Not as memory, but as inheritance. In every worker who demands justice. In every artist who refuses silence. In every human who dares to stand when the world tells them to kneel. There, still, walks Spartacus. Part 13, where we enter the final movement, exploring how modern technology, politics, and human identity continue to echo the rebellion, and how Spartacus's spirit lives in today's struggles for freedom, dignity, and truth. The world has changed its armor. The swords are gone. The legions have vanished into the dust. But empire has learned to wear new faces. It no longer builds walls of stone or chains of iron. Its borders are invisible now, drawn in wealth, in code, in silence. And still, it feeds on the same thing, obedience. Every generation believes it is free. Every empire believes it has perfected control. And yet, beneath the polished surface of civilization, the same pulse beats, the one that began with a man named Spartacus. In the glow of a screen, a billion eyes watch 1,000 wars. Rebellion has become a broadcast. Resistance a hashtag. Freedom a fragile stream of data crossing fiber and flame. But look closely. And the pattern remains. Somewhere, in a corner of a city, a voice refuses to be silenced. A journalist leaks the truth. A worker stands against a system built to consume them. A girl holds a sign in a crowd, trembling but unbroken. They are surrounded by armies of disinformation. Watched by unseen eyes. And still, they rise. And when they do, whether they know it or not, they echo a vow whispered long ago in the sands of Italy. We will not kneel again. The modern world builds its gladiators differently. They no longer fight beasts for the amusement of crowds. They fight the algorithms. The systems that measure worth in clicks and numbers. That reward performance over truth. The new arenas are digital. The spectators endless. And the cost of losing is the same as it was 2,000 years ago. To be forgotten. But every so often, one breaks through the spectacle. One voice cuts through the noise. Not because it is loud, but because it is real. And that, too, is rebellion. History no longer burns in the torchlight of amphitheaters. It burns in the minds of those who question. In the students who refuse propaganda. In the workers who demand humanity over profit. In the children who ask why when told because. Each question, each act of refusal, is a spark. And together, they form the same fire that once blazed in the heart of a Thracian slave. Spartacus no longer needs to be reborn. Because he never died. He simply changed form. When you speak his name today, It does not echo in Latin. It hums quietly in every language that dreams of freedom. From the crowded alleys of Dhaka to the high towers of New York. From the protests of Tehran to the silence of those who resist in secret. Spartacus walks among them. He has no flag, no party, no country. He belongs to all who are unafraid to imagine a world without masters. Rome was not destroyed in a single battle. It decayed from within, its greed, its cruelty, its blindness. And in that collapse, the legacy of its slaves became the whisper of the future. For every empire that rises, another Spartacus is born. For every throne built on fear, another voice dares to say no. And though history repeats its violence, the dream that began in bondage moves forward. Slowly, stubbornly, endlessly. Because rebellion, in its purest form, is not about victory. It is about memory. It is the promise that even when crushed, humanity remembers itself. One day, even our own world, the digital Rome of data and division, will crumble. Our empires of information will turn to dust. Our monuments of code will fade into forgotten language. But the story of Spartacus will remain. Not as myth, but as mirror. Because as long as power exists, so too will the will to break it. And when that future dawns, and another generation rises to face its own masters, they will not know his name, but they will know his heart. And somewhere, across time, the echo will rise again. In whispers, in defiance, in courage. I am Spartacus. Part 14, where the tone shifts into reflection, exploring how the idea of Spartacus has become an eternal symbol of human consciousness itself, transcending rebellion and entering philosophy, art, and the meaning of freedom. History is not written in stone. It is written in breath. In the stories that survive the silence. The dust of time buries kings and generals. But sometimes, only sometimes, a single heartbeat defies oblivion. Spartacus was never meant to be remembered. To Rome, he was a criminal. A slave. A warning. His name was supposed to vanish. Lost among the countless millions who lived and died unseen. But the world forgot the masters and remembered the rebel. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. The ruins of Rome turned to quiet fields. Its arenas filled with grass. Its legions turned to legend. And yet, somewhere in the memory of mankind, the Thracian's shadow still stood tall. In medieval manuscripts, monks whispered of a pagan hero who had dared to strike at the Caesars. In Renaissance art, humanists painted him not as a barbarian, but as the first to speak for all mankind. And when philosophers of freedom wrote their treatises centuries later, history is not written in stone. It is written in breath, in whispers carried across time. Kings carve their victories into marble, but marble crumbles. Empires engrave their names into maps, but maps burn. Only one thing survives the ages, the story that refuses to die. Spartacus was never meant to be remembered. To Rome, he was not a hero, he was a slave who dared to challenge divine order. His rebellion was to be erased, his followers crucified. Their bodies nailed to crosses lining the Appian Way like a warning carved into flesh. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who dream of freedom. And yet, history betrayed its masters. Rome's emperors faded into dust. Its marble statues fell and broke. Its temples turned to silence. But the name Spartacus remained, echoing softly in the human heart. The world forgot the masters and remembered the slave. For centuries, the story of Spartacus drifted like a lost ember, hidden beneath layers of conquest and religion. But each age, in its own dark hour, found that ember again, and breathed life into it. He was reborn whenever men and women refused to kneel. In the medieval world, where peasants bowed to kings and priests, Spartacus became a forbidden symbol. A whisper shared among those who longed for justice in a world ruled by divine chains. The church called him pagan. The nobles called him mad. But the people called him something else. A man who dared. When the Renaissance dawned and art rediscovered the beauty of the human form, Spartacus returned in marble and paint. No longer a criminal, but a symbol of the human spirit standing naked before power. To the artists of Florence, he was not just a gladiator, but the embodiment of virtù. That rare strength of soul which refuses to yield. Then came the Enlightenment. An age of reason, where philosophers sought to unchain the mind. Voltaire wrote of the tyranny of kings, Rousseau dreamed of liberty born in struggle. In their words, the ghost of Spartacus smiled. He had become an idea. No longer bound by chains or flesh, but by principle. When revolutions swept across Europe, in France, in Haiti, in the Americas, his story returned again, cloaked in banners and blood. Each uprising saw itself reflected in that Thracian fire. A world turned upside down. The powerless daring to speak. The condemned daring to live free. In the 19th century, as industrial cities rose and workers drowned in smoke, Spartacus became their patron saint of defiance. Karl Marx called him the noblest man in the whole of ancient history. To the oppressed, he was proof that rebellion was not madness. It was memory. And in the 20th century, as wars tore continents apart and ideologies consumed nations, his name marched again. From the Spartacist League in Germany to the partisans who fought fascism in the hills of Italy, he had become something larger than a man. He had become a mirror held up to every age that forgot its humanity. Even Hollywood, with its grand illusions, could not resist his fire. When Spartacus reached the silver screen in 1960, his cry, "I am Spartacus," became more than a line of dialogue. It became a declaration of unity against fear. A reminder that even fiction can awaken something ancient in us. The refusal to bow. Across time, his image has changed. To some, he is a hero. To others, a warning. But perhaps that is the truest measure of his legacy. That he cannot be owned. He belongs to no ideology, no empire, no creed. He is the pulse that beats beneath all human chains. 2,000 years have passed. And yet, whenever the world trembles under tyranny, his shadow returns. Sometimes in a protester's shout. Sometimes in a prisoner's whisper. Sometimes in the quiet courage of a person who simply says, "No more." Spartacus lives not in history books, but in the moments when ordinary people choose dignity over survival. He lives in every heart that remembers. Freedom is not granted by power. It is taken back by those who refuse to kneel. Part 15, the final chapter, where the story closes with the full-circle reflection, how Spartacus transcends myth, becoming a timeless force that defines what it means to be human. Time erases everything. Empires rise, crumble, and are forgotten beneath the dust they once ruled. Languages vanish. Statues fall. Even the greatest monuments, carved in marble and pride, return to earth. But not all things fade. Some stories burn too fiercely to die. The story of Spartacus is one of them. Not because he won, he didn't. Not because he conquered, he couldn't. But because he dared to fight a world that told him he wasn't human. And in that defiance, he became more than a man. He became the memory of freedom itself. History remembers him crucified along the Appian Way. His body gone, his rebellion crushed. The empire triumphant. But history also remembers something the empire could not kill. The idea that no chain, no whip, no wall of power can silence the human will to be free. They nailed his flesh to wood, but they could not crucify his dream. That dream walked on, passing from one heart to another, like a secret carried through centuries. A whisper in dark places. A flame in the coldest nights. Every age has known its Rome. Its masters, its laws, its cages. And every age has known its Spartacus. those who rise, nameless and unarmed, and dare to say, enough. They may die unknown, but they live in the bloodstream of humanity. Perhaps that is the truest victory. Not the battle won, but the belief that battle itself is worth fighting. That freedom is not a gift, but a birthright earned by those brave enough to demand it. Spartacus did not free Rome's slaves, but he freed something far greater. The idea that slavery should never be accepted as fate. Look around today. The empires are digital now. The chains are invisible, woven of fear, comfort, and control. But listen closely, and you can still hear him. In protests that light up city streets. In voices that refuse to be censored. In hands that reach out to lift, not strike. The rebellion continues, quiet, steady, eternal. In every act of compassion, there is defiance. In every refusal to hate, there is resistance. And in every person who stands for another, the spirit of Spartacus breathes again. The Romans thought they ended a revolt, but they began a legend. They killed a man, and gave birth to an idea that no empire since has managed to bury. Because the truth is simple, and it terrifies every tyrant who has ever lived. Freedom cannot be conquered. Somewhere tonight, someone will whisper in the dark, dreaming of a better world. And that dream, fragile, beautiful, defiant, will be Spartacus reborn. Because Spartacus is not history. He is humanity. He is every voice that refuses silence. Every heart that refuses surrender. Every hand that reaches for light, even when surrounded by darkness. He began as one man, a Thracian slave, forgotten by empire. But he became something larger than Rome, larger than time. He became a question that every generation must answer for itself. What will you do with your chains? And when that question echoes again, in streets, in classrooms, in the hearts of the oppressed, the answer will rise, as it did 2,000 years ago, beneath the shadow of the crosses on the Appian Way. I am Spartacus.